The path had grown narrow as the afternoon wore on. What began as a wide trade road, worn smooth by decades of wagon wheels and travelers' boots, had slowly transformed into something gentler, a footpath, winding upward through pine trees that seemed to lean in close, as if offering shelter. You had been walking since morning, and your legs carried that pleasant tiredness, the heaviness that comes not from strain, but from steady, purposeful movement. The air had grown colder as you climbed, crisp and clean, carrying the scent of snow that hadn't yet fallen, but it would fall soon. You could feel it in the stillness, in the way the clouds had gathered low over the mountains, soft and gray like wool. The light was fading, not dramatically, but with the gentle inevitability of a winter evening in the high country. And then, around a bend where the path curved between two large stones, you saw it, the inn. It sat in a small clearing, as if the forest had stepped back to make room. A two-story building of dark timber and river stone, with a steep roof built to shed snow. Smoke rose from two chimneys, pale against the darkening sky, curling upward in lazy spirals, before disappearing into the gathering dusk. Light glowed from the window's warm, amber light, the color of safety. You paused for a moment, just looking. There's something about seeing shelter at the end of a long walk, something that settles deep in the chest. A quiet gratitude, wordless and ancient. The wind picked up slightly, stirring the branches overhead, and you felt the first snowflake land on your cheek. Cold, delicate, melting almost instantly. Then another. You pulled your cloak a little tighter and continued down the path toward the door. The inn's entrance was sheltered by a small overhang, and beneath it sat a wooden bench, worn smooth by years of travelers resting before going in. A pair of old boots sat beside the door, crusted with dried mud. A walking staff leaned against the wall. Signs of other journeys, other arrivals. You reached for the iron handle, cold against your palm, and pushed. The door opened with a low creak, a sound both welcoming and familiar, the voice of old wood and well-used hinges. And warmth spilled out to meet you. Not just heat, though that was there too, radiating from somewhere deeper inside, but warmth in the fullest sense. The scent of burning applewood, of bread baked earlier in the day, of herbs hanging to dry, the soft glow of oil lamps. The sense of a space that had welcomed countless cold travelers before you. You stepped inside, and the door closed behind you with a gentle thud. The main room was larger than it had seemed from outside. A long space with a low ceiling, crossed by dark beams. The floor was flagstone, uneven and honest, scattered with woven rugs that had faded into soft, muted colors. Tables and chairs were arranged throughout, simple and sturdy, the wood dark with age and use. But the heart of the room, the center of everything, was the fireplace. It dominated the far wall, built of the same river stone as the inn's exterior, with a mantel wide enough to hold a collection of clay mugs, a few candles, and what looked like a small carved wooden bear. The fire burning within was generous, crackling softly, sending out waves of heat that reached even to where you stood. A few other travelers occupied the space. An older couple sat near the fire, speaking in low voices over bowls of something that steamed gently. A younger man, perhaps a merchant, was writing in a ledger at a corner table, his quill scratching quietly. And near the stairs, a woman sat mending a cloak, her needle moving in steady rhythm. No one looked up as you entered, not out of coldness, but out of respect. The courtesy of travelers who understand the need for quiet arrival. And then, from somewhere behind the long wooden counter that ran along one wall, a voice called out. "Come in. Come in, don't stand there letting the cold follow you." The innkeeper appeared, emerging from a doorway that presumably led to the kitchen. He was a man of perhaps 60 years, with silver-gray hair pulled back and tied, and a face that carried deep lines around the eyes, the marks of someone who had smiled often and meant it. He wore a simple tunic of undyed wool, an apron tied at the waist, and moved with the easy grace of someone entirely at home in this space. "You've come a long way, I'd wager," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. His voice was low and warm, with a slight rasp that suggested years of wood smoke and cold mountain air. "The path from the valley?" You nodded, unwinding the scarf from around your neck. "Thought so. You've got the look of someone who's been walking into the wind." He smiled, gesturing toward the fire. "Find yourself a seat near the hearth. I'll bring you something warm." You didn't need to be told twice. Crossing the room, you chose a chair near the fire, but not directly in front of it. Close enough to feel the heat soak into your tired legs, far enough to avoid the occasional spark that popped from the burning wood. The chair was padded with a cushion that had lost its firmness years ago, but somehow that made it better. It yielded, it welcomed. You sank into it with a long, slow exhale. Outside, through the wavy glass of the nearest window, you could see the snow beginning to fall in earnest now. Not a storm, but a steady, quiet snowfall, the flakes drifting down through the twilight like ash from some distant, gentle fire. The inn felt even warmer by comparison. The innkeeper returned carrying a wooden tray. On it sat a clay mug, steam rising in delicate curls, and a small plate with thick slices of brown bread, a wedge of pale cheese, and a small dish of honey. He set it down on the table beside you with a soft clunk. "Spiced cider," he said, nodding toward the mug. "Apples from the orchard down the mountain. Cinnamon from, well, somewhere much farther away." He chuckled. "The bread's from this morning. Honey's from the bees we keep behind the inn, though they've been asleep for weeks now, sensible creatures." You wrapped your hands around the mug, feeling the warmth seep into your fingers. "Thank you," you murmured. He waved a hand, dismissive but kind. "It's what we're here for. You planning to stay the night?" You nodded. "Good. I'll prepare a room for you once you've had a chance to thaw." He glanced toward the window, toward the snow. Not a night to be on the road, anyhow. He turned as if to leave, then paused, looking back. "If you're not too tired, I'll be tending the fire a while longer. Company's always welcome, if you're inclined." And with that, he moved off, not waiting for an answer, leaving the choice entirely to you. You lifted the mug to your lips and sipped. The cider was perfect, hot, sweet, with the warming bite of spices that spread through your chest. You could taste the apples, yes, but also cloves, a hint of ginger, something almost like star anise. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and persistent, blanketing the world in quiet. Inside, the fire crackled, steady and low, and you sat, warm at last, with nowhere else you needed to be. The fire settled into itself with a soft whisper, a log shifting as it burned through. You had finished the bread and cheese, the honey leaving a sweet warmth on your tongue, and the cider had worked its way into your limbs, a pleasant heaviness, muscles finally allowed to rest after hours of movement. The other travelers had begun to drift away. The older couple had retired upstairs, their footsteps creaking on the wooden boards overhead. The merchant had closed his ledger with a tired sigh and followed soon after. The woman with the mending had folded her work and disappeared into what must have been a private room off the main hall. The inn grew quieter, not silent. There were still sounds, but they were the sounds of a building at rest. The tick and pop of cooling metal from the lamps, the occasional gust of wind pressing against the walls. The snow now visible through the windows as a soft blur of white against the darkness. And the fire, of course, always the fire. The innkeeper emerged from the back room carrying a three-legged stool and a poker. He set the stool down near the hearth, lowered himself onto it with a quiet grunt, and began tending the fire with practiced movements, nudging a log here, repositioning a coal there, opening up pockets for air to feed the flames. He worked without hurry, the poker moving in slow, deliberate strokes. After a moment, he glanced over at you. "You've warmed up, I hope." You nodded. More than warmed. I'd forgotten what it felt like. He smiled at that, a small smile that reached his eyes. "Long walk today?" "Since dawn," you said. "Started down in the valley, followed the river road until it turned east, then took the path up through the pines." "Ah." He set the poker aside, resting it against the stone. "That's a full day's journey, that is, especially this time of year with the days so short." He settled back on his stool, hands resting on his knees. "Not many travelers come up this way in winter. Most wait for spring, when the high passes open again." "I couldn't wait," you said simply. He nodded as if that explained everything, and perhaps it did. There was a pause, not awkward, just space. The fire filled it with its quiet conversation. "I used to walk those roads myself," the innkeeper said after a time. His voice had taken on a different quality, softer, more reflective. "Years ago, before I took over this place, I was a trader of sorts. Carried goods up and down the mountain routes. Wool going south, spices coming north. Metalwork from the forges in the eastern valleys." He gazed into the fire as he spoke, and you could see the memories moving behind his eyes. "It's a strange life, trading. You're always between places, never quite settled. You sleep in a different bed each week, eat at a different hearth. You learn the roads better than you know your own village." "Did you enjoy it?" you asked. He considered this, tilting his head slightly. "Enjoy, that's a curious word for it. There were moments, yes, watching the sunrise from a high ridge, when the whole world below is still wrapped in mist. Sitting around a campfire with other travelers, sharing stories and a skin of wine. Finding a shortcut through the woods that shaves half a day off your journey." He paused, rubbing his hands together slowly. "But it's a hard life, too. Your feet ache constantly. You're always watching the weather, hoping the rain holds off or the snow doesn't come early. You carry everything you own on your back, and it gets heavier with every mile." Another log shifted in the fire, sending up a small shower of sparks that vanished into the chimney. "So why stop?" you asked. The innkeeper smiled, broader this time. "Love, mostly. Met a woman in the village below, a weaver, skilled hands, quick laugh. She had no interest in walking the roads, and I found I had even less interest in walking them without her." He gestured around the room with one hand, a sweeping motion that took in the beams, the stones, the worn furniture. Her family owned this inn. It had been in their keeping for 3 generations, but it was falling into disrepair. Needed someone willing to work, to rebuild, to stay. He shrugged. "Turned out I was willing." "And your wife?" you asked gently. His expression softened, a mix of warmth and sadness. "Gone these 5 years now. Winter fever came on quick." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "But she loved this place. Loved the travelers who came through, loved hearing their stories, loved making sure they had a warm bed and a full belly." He looked around the room again, and this time his gaze held something like reverence. "So I keep it as she would have. That's how I think of it. Not just running an inn, but continuing something. Holding a space for people who need it." You felt something settle in your chest, a recognition of what this place was. Not just shelter from the weather, but shelter in a deeper sense. A refuge maintained by someone who understood what it meant to be far from home. "You still know the roads, though," you said. "I can hear it in the way you talk about them." "Oh, I remember them," he said, nodding slowly. "Every bend, every marker stone, every place where the path splits, and you have to choose. I could walk them blindfolded, I think, even now. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. There's one route in particular I think about sometimes. The old trader's path that runs along the ridge above the eastern valley. It's barely used anymore. The new road down in the valley is faster, easier for wagons. But the ridge path, he trailed off, searching for words. What about it? It's beautiful, he said simply. You walk for hours with nothing but sky on one side and forest on the other. In autumn, when the leaves turn, it's like walking through fire, all gold and crimson. And there are ruins up there, old stone foundations from some settlement that was abandoned centuries ago. No one remembers what it was called or why they left. He was quiet for a moment, lost in the memory. I used to stop there sometimes, at those ruins, sit on the old walls and eat my lunch, watch the hawks circle below me in the valley. It was peaceful in a way that's hard to describe. Like the world had forgotten that place, and so it just rested. You could picture it, could almost feel the wind on that high ridge, the vast openness. Do you miss it? You asked. The walking? The roads? The innkeeper was quiet, considering. The fire popped softly. Some days, he admitted. When spring comes and I see the traders heading out with their packs, or when I hear birds migrating overhead, there's a pull, you know? The body remembers. He shifted on his stool, stretching his back with a small grimace. But then I think about my bed upstairs, about waking up in the same room every morning, about knowing exactly where my kettle is and which floorboard creaks. I think about the travelers who come through here, how some of them return year after year, and how we pick up conversations from months ago as if no time has passed. He looked at you directly, his eyes warm in the firelight. I think about nights like this, sitting by a fire I built in a hearth I repaired, talking with someone who understands what it means to walk a long road. He smiled. No, I don't miss it. I carried the best parts with me. Outside, the wind picked up for a moment, rattling the shutters gently before falling away. The snow continued its patient work, covering the world in silence. You sipped the last of your cider, now cooled but still sweet. Tell me about the ruins, you said. On the ridge path. The innkeeper's face brightened, the storyteller's light coming into his eyes. Ah, he said, settling back. Now that's a tale worth telling. The innkeeper rose from his stool, just for a moment, and retrieved a clay jug from the counter. He refilled your mug with more cider, warm from where it had been sitting near the kitchen hearth, then poured some for himself into a worn wooden cup. He settled back down, cradling the cup in both hands. The ruins, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone who has told stories before, who understands the value of a slow beginning. They sit on a flat stretch of ridge, maybe a day and a half's walk from here if you know the path. 2 days if you don't. He took a sip. Let the warmth spread. When you first come upon them, you almost don't notice. They're so overgrown with moss and small trees that they look like natural formations, just shapes in the landscape. But then you see the right angles, the way the stones are fitted together, and you realize someone built this. Someone lived here. You could hear the wind outside, moving through the pines with a sound like distant water. There are maybe 8 or 9 foundations arranged in a rough circle. Small buildings, most of them. Houses, probably. And in the center, a larger foundation with what's left of a stone hearth, still intact after all these years. He gestured with one hand, drawing the layout in the air. I used to wonder about them, the people who lived there. Why they chose that spot, so high up and exposed. What they did for water. There's no stream nearby, though there are some old cisterns carved into the rock that still hold rainwater if you look. How long ago, you asked? He shrugged. No one knows for certain. The stones are weathered smooth, the mortar long gone, centuries at least, maybe longer. He paused, considering. There are no markings, no carvings. Nothing to say who they were. A log in the fire cracked, splitting along an old seam. But I'll tell you what I think, the innkeeper continued, leaning forward slightly. I think they were watchers, guardians of some kind. That ridge overlooks 3 valleys. You can see for miles in every direction on a clear day. You'd know if anyone was coming, traders or otherwise, long before they arrived. A defensive position, you said. Perhaps, or perhaps just observers. Keepers of the road. He smiled faintly. I like to think they were peaceful folk, that they sat on those walls as I did, and watched the world move below them, and felt content with their watching. He fell quiet for a moment, gazing into his cup. There's one other thing there, he said, softer now. A tree, an old oak, massive thing, growing right in the middle of what must have been the central building. Its roots have broken through the foundation stones, split them apart, but gently somehow, as if the tree and the ruins have reached an understanding. You could picture it. The ancient oak, the crumbling stones, the two of them locked in their slow dance of growth and decay. I carved my initials into that tree once, the innkeeper admitted, with a slight smile of embarrassment. Young man's foolishness. Wanted to leave a mark, I suppose. Show that I'd been there. He shook his head. The trees probably swallowed those carvings by now, grown right over them. Which is as it should be. The fire had burned down to a bed of glowing coals, pulsing gently with heat. The innkeeper stirred them with the poker, then added a single log, placing it carefully so it would catch slowly. The ridge path leads on from there, he continued, following the high country for another 2 days before it descends into the eastern valley. And all along that stretch, there are signs of the old world. Stone markers barely visible now. Cairns built by travelers, each one adding a rock as they passed. And in one place, a carving in a boulder, a hand, palm flat, pressed into the stone as if in greeting. Who made it? You asked. No idea. It's old, though. The edges are soft with age. He held up his own hand, fingers spread. I put my hand against it once, matched my palm to the carving. Whoever made it had small hands, slender fingers. Maybe a young person. Maybe a woman. He lowered his hand, folded it back around his cup. I thought about that hand for miles afterward. Wondered what that person's life was like, what they were thinking when they pressed their palm into the stone. Were they marking a journey's beginning or its end? Were they happy or afraid or simply tired? The snow outside had thickened, the flakes larger now, drifting past the windows in lazy spirals. That's the thing about the old roads, the innkeeper said quietly. They're full of ghosts, not frightening ones, just presences, the echo of everyone who walked before you. You feel them sometimes, especially at dusk, when the light goes soft and the shadows grow long. He took another sip, let the silence stretch. There's a stretch of forest about 3 days south of here, where the path goes through a stand of ancient beeches. Their trunks are smooth and gray, like pillars in some great hall. In summer, the canopy is so thick that almost no light reaches the ground. You walk through green twilight, cool and hushed. I've heard of such places, you said. He nodded. Many roads have them. Sacred groves, some call them, though I don't know if sacred is the right word. Special, certainly. Different. He paused, choosing his words. When you walk through those trees, you walk quietly without meaning to. Something about the place asks for silence. Did you ever camp there? Once, he said. Only once. I was young, maybe 20 summers, and I thought myself brave. He smiled at the memory. I spread my bedroll right in the center of the grove, built a small fire, ate my supper, and as night came on, I heard singing. You felt a small chill, not unpleasant. Not words, he clarified quickly. Just sounds, low and melodic, like wind through a canyon. But there was no wind. It came from everywhere and nowhere, weaving through the trees. He shook his head slowly. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, exactly. I just felt I shouldn't. Felt I should stay awake and listen, as if the forest was telling me something important, even if I couldn't understand the language. And in the morning? Morning came soft and gray. The singing had stopped, or perhaps I'd simply grown used to it and couldn't hear it anymore. I packed my things, scattered the ashes of my fire, and continued on. He looked at you. I've never camped there since. I pass through, yes, but I don't stop. Some places aren't meant for sleeping. The fire had caught the new log now, flames beginning to curl around its edges with gentle persistence. There are happier stories too, the innkeeper said, his tone lightening. The road isn't all ruins and singing forests. There are villages tucked into valleys, where the smoke from cooking fires smells of rosemary and garlic. There are meadows so full of wildflowers in spring that you can't see the ground. There are streams so clear you can count the pebbles at the bottom, and the water tastes like snow and stone. He leaned back, stretching his legs toward the fire. I remember one village in particular, tiny place, maybe 15 houses, built around a mill pond. The miller there had a daughter, beautiful girl with red hair and freckles across her nose. Every trader who passed through fell a little bit in love with her. He chuckled softly. She knew it too, the clever thing. She'd sell us bread from her father's grain, and we'd pay twice what it was worth just to talk to her while she wrapped it. She must have made a fortune over the years. Did she marry one of the traders, you asked? Gods, no. She married the blacksmith's son, a local boy who'd known her since childhood. They had 4 children last I heard, and she still sells bread to passing traders, though her hair's gone gray now. He smiled. Some things change, some things don't. The wind gusted again, stronger this time, making the flames dance sideways for a moment before settling. The old road teaches you that, the innkeeper said thoughtfully, that nothing stays the same, and yet nothing truly changes. The villages you knew might be gone, but new ones rise in different places. The traders you traveled with grow old or find other work, but new traders take up the packs and walk the same paths. The road itself shifts, landslides, floods, new bridges, but the direction remains constant. He gazed into the fire, his face soft with memory. I walked those roads for 15 years, and in all that time I never felt lost. Not truly. Because the road always knew where it was going, even if I didn't. Outside, the night deepened. The snow continued to fall, patient and steady, adding to the silence that wrapped around the inn like a blanket. The innkeeper finished his cider and set the cup down with a soft tap against the stone hearth. There's something I want to show you, he said, rising from his stool with a slight creak of old knees. If you're not too tired. You looked at him, curious. He smiled. Come. It's just upstairs. You rose from your chair, feeling the stiffness in your legs, that pleasant ache that comes from a day well walked, followed by an hour of stillness. The innkeeper had already moved toward the stairs, carrying one of the oil lamps from the counter. Its light swayed gently as he climbed, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. You followed. The stairs were narrow and steep, built into the corner of the building. Each step creaked under your weight, a different note for each board, like the keys of some ancient wooden instrument. The air grew slightly cooler as you climbed, away from the fire's reach. At the top, A short hallway stretched in both directions. Doors lined each side. Guest rooms, you assumed, their brass handles gleaming dully in the lamplight. The innkeeper turned right, walking to the far end of the hall, where a final door stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was smaller than you expected. Not a guest room, but something more private. A study, perhaps, or a personal retreat. 3 walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were filled with books. Not many by a scholar's standards, perhaps 60 or 70 volumes in total, but for a remote mountain inn, it was a treasure. The books were of all sizes and conditions. Some bound in leather, their spines embossed with fading gold letters. Others were simple cloth-covered journals, stacked in uneven piles. A few were loose gatherings of pages, tied with ribbon or string. A small desk sat beneath the room's single window, which looked out over the forest and the falling snow. On the desk, a candle in a brass holder, an inkwell, a few quills in a clay cup, and a pair of reading spectacles folded neatly on an open book. The innkeeper set the lamp on the desk and gestured around the room with obvious affection. "My wife started this collection," he said softly. "She believed that stories shouldn't die with the teller, so she began asking travelers if they had time, if they were willing to write down something from their journeys, a memory, a place they'd seen, a lesson learned." He moved to one of the shelves and ran his fingers along the spines, reading titles that weren't quite titles, more like labels. The river road in summer, the northern passes, markets of the coast. Nights under stars. He pulled one volume free, a slim journal bound in dark blue cloth, and opened it carefully. The pages were covered in neat, sloping handwriting. The ink faded to brown. "This one's from a merchant who traded in fabrics," the innkeeper said. "Silk, mostly, from the eastern kingdoms. She traveled alone, which was unusual for a woman in those days, and she wrote about the colors she saw, not just in the fabrics she carried, but in the world itself." He held the page toward the lamplight and read aloud, his voice gentle. "Today I walked through a forest where the light fell green through the leaves, and I realized I had no silk to match it. No dye could capture that particular shade, the color of sunlight filtered through living things. I thought about this for miles, how some colors exist only in moments and can never be held." He closed the book carefully and returned it to its place. "She died 20 years ago, that merchant," he said, "lost at sea on a voyage to the southern islands. But her words remain, her seeing remains." You stepped closer to the shelves, drawn by curiosity. The lamplight caught the edges of the books, making them glow softly. "May I?" you asked. "Please," the innkeeper said, stepping back to give you space. "That's why they're here. To be read." You reached for a volume at random, a leather-bound book, larger than the others, with no title on the spine. Opening it, you found pages filled with sketches as much as words, drawings of mountains, rendered in careful pencil, a bridge over a gorge, a village square with a well in the center. The handwriting was blocky, unpracticed, but sincere. "I am not good with words," you read aloud, "so I draw what I see. My father was a cartographer, and he taught me to look closely, to notice the angle of a roof or the way a river bends. These are my maps, but they do not show the way to anywhere. They only show that I was there and that I looked." You turned a page, a detailed sketch of a church bell, its surface covered in verdigris. Another page, a cat sleeping on a windowsill, curled into a perfect circle. "Beautiful," you murmured. The innkeeper nodded. "That was a man named Thomas, a quiet fellow, kept to himself mostly. He stayed here 3 winters running, always in late autumn. He'd walk the high country during the day, sketching, then return at night and sit by the fire, barely saying a word. He moved to the window, looking out at the snow. The last winter he came, he was ill. Something in his lungs, a rattle when he breathed. My wife nursed him as best she could, but he trailed off, then continued more quietly. He died here, actually, in one of the guest rooms, on a gray morning in early winter. There was no sadness in his voice, only a kind of peaceful acceptance. Before he passed, he gave my wife that book, asked her to keep it on the shelf so that others might see what he'd seen. The innkeeper touched the window glass, where condensation had gathered. So we did. And sometimes on nights like this, I take it down and turn the pages, and it's as if Thomas is still here, still looking closely at the world. You returned the book to the shelf, your fingers lingering on its spine. Do all the journals have stories like that? You asked. In one way or another. He gestured to the shelves. Some are simple lists of towns visited, weather noted, meals remembered. Others are more reflective, philosophical even. And a few. He paused, moving to a different shelf, lower down, where the books were older and more worn. A few are strange, written in the deep hours of night by people who'd walked too far, thought too much, seen things that couldn't quite be explained. He pulled out a thin volume, its cover stained and warped as if it had been wet and dried many times. This one, for instance, written by a shepherd who claimed he'd found a valley that doesn't appear on any map. A place where the seasons don't change, where it's always late spring, always warm, always in bloom. He opened it, flipped through pages. He describes it in great detail. The flowers that grow there, varieties he'd never seen before or since. The sound of water over stones, which he swears sang in harmonies, actual notes and chords. The sky, which he says was a deeper blue than any sky should be. Do you believe him? You asked. The innkeeper closed the book, considering. I believe he saw something. Whether it was exactly as he described, or whether it was translated through exhaustion and wonder and hope, I don't know. But does it matter? He replaced the book. The valley exists in these pages. People have read about it, dreamed about it, perhaps even gone looking for it. And in that way, it's real enough. You moved along the shelves, reading titles, touching spines. The room smelled of old paper and lamp oil, a comforting combination. One book caught your attention. A small journal with a red cover, its pages edged in gold. You drew it out carefully. The handwriting inside was elegant, flowing, the work of someone educated. I have walked for 40 days, you read, and in that time I have learned this. The journey changes you in ways you cannot predict. You begin as one person and arrive as another, though the shift is so gradual you don't notice it happening. It is only when you return to a familiar place, to people who knew you before, that you realize how far you've truly traveled. The innkeeper smiled. That was a scholar from the Southern University. She was researching pilgrimage routes, the old holy roads, spent a year walking them, every single one she could find. That journal is just one of 3 she filled. He moved to the desk and lowered himself into the chair with a soft sigh. She concluded that the roads themselves were holy, not the destinations, that the walking was the prayer, and the journey was the temple. He adjusted his spectacles, though he wasn't reading anything. I thought that was a fine way of seeing it. You continued to turn pages, finding pressed flowers between some of them, petals flattened and faded, but still holding their shape. Wildflowers, mountain blooms, a sprig of lavender. My wife did that, the innkeeper said, noticing. She'd add flowers from the season when each traveler stayed, a way of marking time. The lamp flickered slightly, the flame dancing in a draft you couldn't feel. Outside, the snow had settled into a steady rhythm, accumulating on the windowsill in a soft drift. You're welcome to read as long as you like, the innkeeper said, rising from the chair. I should go down and bank the fire, Make sure the embers are safe for the night, but take your time. The lamp is yours. He moved toward the door, then paused. There are blank journals on the bottom shelf, he said, not quite looking at you, and ink and quills, in case you feel moved to add something of your own. No pressure, of course, but the offer stands. And with that, he was gone, his footsteps creaking down the hallway, down the stairs, fading into the quiet of the inn below. You stood alone in the small library, surrounded by the voices of travelers who had come before. The lamplight swayed gently. The snow fell, and you reached for another book, settling into the chair by the window, ready to read into the deepening night. You read for a while longer, though time became difficult to measure in that small room. One journal became 2, then 3. Stories of mountain passes and coastal villages, of storms weathered and friendships made. Words written by candlelight in distant inns, by people whose names you'd never know, but whose hearts you glimpsed through their careful sentences. The lamp burned lower, its flame shrinking to a steady golden bead. Outside, the snow continued its work, transforming the world into something soft and simplified. The trees beyond the window had become suggestions of themselves, dark shapes against darkness, their branches heavy with white. You closed the last journal gently and returned it to its shelf. For a moment you stood there, looking at the collection, all these fragments of journeys, all these moments captured and preserved. You thought about the innkeeper's offer, the blank journals waiting on the bottom shelf. Perhaps in the morning you thought, perhaps after rest, the words would come. You took the lamp and made your way back to the hallway. The inn was deeply quiet now. From somewhere below you could hear the faint settling of the banked fire, the soft tick of cooling metal. But no voices, no footsteps. The other guests had long since retired, and the innkeeper had presumably done the same. You walked slowly down the hall, the lamplight preceding you, and stopped at the third door on the left. The room he'd mentioned earlier, prepared for you. The brass handle was cool under your palm. The door opened without sound. The room was small and simple, which somehow made it perfect. A narrow bed against one wall, made up with wool blankets in shades of gray and cream. A small table beside it, holding a clay pitcher of water and a basin. A single chair near the window, and on the windowsill, a candle in a blue glass holder. Someone, the innkeeper, certainly had already lit this candle. Its flame burned steadily, casting a soft blue-tinted light across the whitewashed walls. You set the lamp on the table and moved to the window. The view looked out over the clearing where you'd first glimpsed the inn, though now everything had changed. The path you'd walked was invisible beneath the snow. The trees were transformed into silent sentinels, their branches bowed under the weight of white. The world had become a study in gradients, black to gray to white, with no hard edges anywhere. It was still snowing, though lighter now. The flakes drifted down like thoughts settling into sleep, each one dissolving the moment it touched the ground. You stood there for a long moment, just watching. There's something about snow at night, something that speaks to a very old part of the mind. Perhaps it's the silence it brings, the way it muffles all sound except the beating of your own heart. Perhaps it's the erasure, the way it covers the world's complexity and leaves only simplicity. Or perhaps it's simply beautiful, and beauty needs no explanation. You turned from the window and began to prepare for sleep. Your pack went in the corner, leaned against the wall, your boots unlaced and set beside the chair, still damp from the day's walking. Your cloak hung on a wooden peg near the door, where it could dry overnight. The water in the pitcher was cold but clean. You poured some into the basin and washed your face, your hands. The shock of cold water on warm skin, bracing and clarifying. You dried yourself with a small linen towel that had been folded on the table. Then you extinguished the lamp, leaving only the candle burning. The bed, when you drew back the blankets, revealed clean linen sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. Someone had tucked a small sachet between the layers, another of the innkeeper's touches, or perhaps his wife's tradition, carried on. You slipped between the sheets. The mattress was filled with straw, you thought, or perhaps wool. It rustled softly as you settled your weight, then grew quiet. The pillow was firm, but yielding. The blankets were heavy, substantial, the kind that create their own warmth through weight and weaving. You lay on your back for a while, looking up at the ceiling. The wooden beams crossed overhead, dark lines against the white plaster, in the candle's light. They seemed almost to shift, as if the house itself were breathing. But it was only the flame moving, creating the illusion of motion where there was only stillness. Your body began to release the day's tensions, one by one. Your feet, which had carried you so far, relaxed against the mattress. Your legs, heavy and warm beneath the blankets, sank deeper into the bed's embrace. Your back, which had borne your pack through the long climb, spread wide and softened. Your breathing slowed without you intending it to, in and out, like the rhythm of walking, but gentler, like the rhythm of the snow falling, patient and steady. You thought about the innkeeper's words, about the old roads and the people who walked them, about the hand pressed into stone, reaching across centuries, about the merchant who tried to capture the color of light through leaves, and failed, and wrote about it anyway, about Thomas and his careful sketches, his quiet seeing, about the scholar who understood that the journey was the temple. You thought about the journals in the small library upstairs, all those voices speaking softly in the dark. And you wondered what you might write, if you chose to. What moment from your own journey might be worth preserving, worth offering to some future traveler who would sit in that chair by the window, reading by lamplight while snow fell outside? Perhaps the moment of arriving here, perhaps the warmth of the fire after hours of cold. Perhaps this feeling right now, the deep peace of being safe, of being warm, of being exactly where you need to be. The candle flickered. You turned your head to look at it. The flame had burned down, the wax pooling in the blue glass holder. The light it cast was softer now, barely reaching the corners of the room. Shadows gathered gently, not threatening, just present. The night claiming its space. You didn't need the light anymore. Your eyes were growing heavy, your thoughts beginning to blur at the edges, dream logic seeping in. You could still hear the snow, just barely. Or perhaps you were imagining it. That soft sound, like whispers, like the turning of pages, like the settling of old wood. The inn creaked once, a long, slow sound that traveled through the walls. Not a complaint, just a comment. The building acknowledging the cold, the weight of snow on its roof, the passage of another night. You felt yourself drifting, not falling, drifting, like a leaf on still water, moving without effort, carried by currents too gentle to name. The room grew dimmer. The candle, you should blow it out, you thought. But the thought came from very far away, and your body was so warm, so heavy, so perfectly still, and then you weren't sure, but you thought you heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft footsteps, careful not to wake anyone. The door opened, just a crack. A shadow moved into the room, crossed to the table. You felt rather than saw the innkeeper lean over the candle, felt the soft breath that extinguished the flame. Darkness, complete and gentle. A hand, you were almost certain, rested briefly on the blanket near your shoulder. A benediction, a wordless assurance. Then the footsteps retreated, the door closed with a whisper, and you were alone again in the deep quiet. But not alone. The inn held you. The room held you. The blankets held you. And all the travelers who had slept here before, all the voices in the journals upstairs, all the people who had walked the old roads and found their way to this place, they held you too in their way. You were part of something now, part of the long story of journeys and rest, of walking and stopping, of leaving and arriving. Your breathing had become almost imperceptible, in and out, like the snow falling, like the passage of time, which means nothing when you're this deep into sleep. The world outside continued its patient transformation. The trees bowed lower under their burden of white. The path disappeared completely. The clearing became a perfect blank page, waiting to be written on by morning footprints. But that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, there was only this warmth and darkness and the feeling of being held. Your thoughts became fragments, then less than fragments. The fire downstairs burning to embers, red and gold fading. The journals, their pages turning in memory, in dream, the hand in the stone reaching across time. The ridge path and the ruins and the oak tree growing where a hearth once stood. The sound of singing in the beech forest, a language you almost understood. The innkeeper's voice telling stories that might have been memories or might have been dreams themselves. The merchant with her silks, trying to capture impossible colors. The road, always the road, knowing where it was going even when you didn't. And then, nothing. Not darkness, not silence, not even peace. Just nothing. The deep, complete nothing that is true sleep. The snow fell through the night, covering everything in soft, white silence. The inn stood, warm and safe, holding its travelers close. And you slept, deeply and dreamlessly, carried far away on currents of rest, until morning would come, gentle and gray, and find you still there, still safe, still held. But morning was hours away yet, hours and hours of darkness and warmth and perfect, perfect stillness. Sleep well, traveler.